as I kept researching depression and trying to figure out ways to make myself happier, basically, I slowly but surely started to figure out that it was social isolation that was one of the main culprits behind feeling depressed. And I just want to point out that all of these things that I'm talking about in this series on depression, they're all interconnected and they all affect each other. And so if you're physically ill, if you're constantly watching porn, if you're, constantly lethargic because you're always binging on sugar, you'll be less likely to go out to that party and have fun, or to call up a friend and meet out and go play football or whatever it is you want to do with them. So all of these things contribute to each other. And in the same way, like if you're not meeting people regularly and not sharing your values and your ideas with these people, that's going to make you more likely to actually binge out on sugar, or to kind of, dive into the rabbit hole of video games and porn or whatever. So that's something that needs to be kept in mind. So when I say that something is a major cause for depression, just keep in mind that I mean that these things are all contributing to depression, and they're all kind of pushing each other's buttons, so to speak. But I think I would say that growing up, I was more or less a typical millennial. Like I grew up on video games and television series, and then when I became a teenager, I started watching loads of porn, and I had friends, and I would go out, and especially while I was in school, I made quite a lot of friends, and even though I had like really crippling social anxiety for a long time, and I was also often very depressed, I also had a group of friends, and I had a lot of fun. But I always kind of had this feeling that, I didn't need other people, that I had like my video games, and I was able to be alone for long periods of time without social contact. What I didn't realize, however, was that this was a large reason for why I was feeling depressed in the first place. And I had been kind of working from the premise that depression, like the reason that I was depressed was just because it was genetic. It was in my family, and my mother had been depressed, and my father had often been depressed as well. And that may be the case, that depression runs in the family, but I now no longer believe that there is a genetic component to it at all. Like, there's no reason for there to be a depressive gene. Like, that's just ridiculous. It will always be something circumstantial and environmental. And if we take responsibility for our mental state, we can start to affect it. And now, whether or not I'm right about this, whether there is a genetic component or not, doesn't really matter, because anybody who's depressed can improve their state considerably, even if they are more inclined to be depressed than other people. So that's something to keep in mind as well. At some point, I can't remember the first time I read this book, but it's called Lost Connections by Johann Hari. Or Johann Hari, I should say. I think he's British, not Norwegian. But in this book, which is absolutely awesome, and I really recommend it, I'll leave a link down below if you want to check it out. He goes into his own theory of depression, and he dealt with depression himself, and has dealt with depression his whole life, and been on various medications for depression, and he came to the conclusion that it's a similar conclusion to me, in fact, that depression is not actually something that's broken within us that we need to fix with drugs, but something rather that we need to address, something which is wrong in our lives that needs to be fixed and acknowledged and even grieved over. And I want to just quickly read you a quote from his book. "You aren't a machine with broken parts. You are an animal whose needs are not being met. You need to have a community. You need to have meaningful values, not the junk values you've been pumped full of all your life, telling you happiness comes through money and buying objects. You need to have meaningful work. You need the natural world, and you need to feel you are respected. You need a secure future. You need connections to all these things, and you need to release any shame you might feel for having been mistreated." this really touches at the root of the matter, I think. Depression isn't something wrong with you. It's a sign that there's something wrong with your life and with your environment. And I think the reason that he talks about lost connections, I always connected it to like social connections, mostly. And that is definitely a huge part. But I found that even in periods of my life where I was surrounded by people and I was very social, I would even sometimes then have like an inclination toward depression. And I think there's this level of superficiality in modern society that needs to be addressed in this area. I think the fact that we're surrounded by other people isn't enough. We need to be able to share our values and share our ideas with these people, and in that way truly connect to other people, not just the superficial connections that we make with so many people around the world. I want to read another quote from his book, because it's that good. You need your nausea. You need your pain. It is a message, and we must listen to the message. All these depressed and anxious people all over the world, they're giving us a message. They're telling us something has gone wrong with the way we live, and we need to stop trying to muffle or silence or pathologize the pain. Instead, we need to listen to it and honor it. It is only when we listen to our pain that we can follow it back to its source, and only there, when we can see its true causes, can we begin to overcome it. So I think it's hard to see this disconnect sometimes, because we have social media and we have telephones and we have all this stuff that we didn't have 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. Somehow I get the feeling that we're less connected than we were then. And that brings me to my final point, which is that it's not just social connection that we're missing. It's connection to the natural world around us. I think that's one of the main reasons that people these days have such an inclination towards depression. We're like, look around my room here. I have 4, whitewashed cement walls. Perfect square. Everything around me is man-made except for my houseplants here. I look out the window and I see asphalt and some more man-made buildings. A bit of grass, a few trees. And if I were to stay here every day, all day, I would get really depressed. But I make it a point to get out of the house and to go to the park and get out of the city as often as I can, because I know that in the natural world there is potential for inspiration and for happiness that cannot be found within the city and cannot be found within these cement blocks that we live in. And so this is something I think it behooves us to become aware of, is that as much as I am thankful for all of these awesome things, like having a roof over my head, windows, electricity and heating and all this stuff, I am incredibly thankful for that, and it's no less than a miracle that we have these things. We can't afford to lose the connection with the natural world fully, and that's something that we need to take responsibility for ourselves. And if we live in a place where we can't reach the natural world, we really need to start thinking about moving. And I'm serious. Like, this is just that important. But I'll end this video here. I hope you've gotten some value from this, and if you did, you can like and subscribe. Check out my book, Health Simplified. I'll link it down below. That's where I go into my own journey with healing through fasting and a simple diet, and I go into all of the insights that I gained along the way on that journey of healing myself. And I think you can get a lot of value from that as well. And it's cheap as well, so it doesn't have to break the bank. Check out my website as well. I've got a few articles on there that you might like if you enjoyed this video. But until next time, see ya.